Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm Dylan Roberts. I'm a solutions architect here on the professional services team. So if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat into the Q&A. There was one pre-submitted question, which we can start off with. And that question was from Tyson from a dashboard, passing in the selected rows from a report into a flow for work. So the way to do that would be through a user action, a group user action. That would probably be the one way we could do that. So if you had a single record you were trying to pass into a flow, there's a couple ways to approach it. One being a standard user action. Another way being that you can have that like an ID or something as a variable in the URL. So what I mean by that is when you right click something, you can see I put here, I want to pass name into it. So when I click on a record, name changes in the URL, and you can have something listening to that change. So that would be for a single record. Problem with that is when you do like a multi-select with that approach, you're not going to get multiple records appearing in there. So what you'd likely want to do there is, let me change this into, let me give it some action so I can build one. Okay, let's get into the configuration. Let's create a group user action. I'll just leave it basic and let's just show pop up. Let me just do this real quick. All my entities, I'm going to just put all first name, join them into a string. Then we can put that string message to here. So what the group action will allow you to do now is on your report, run it, and you select multiple names. So let's go these first three. You right click and you click your group action. What you'll see is that those three records have been passed into that workflow that you can now use. That workflow, if you needed to do something like in real time, it could be a synchronous flow. You could also, if you want like an asynchronous process to happen, then you could put an async flow in that action so that it happens in the back end. But that would be how I would get multiple records from a report into a flow for some work. Let's check the chat. Okay, cool. I'm glad that works. Okay, so I see there's another question in the chat. So how does active form flows data work? Or how to add form input data to use in an active form flow? Okay, let's walk through that. Let me build a flow. In here, I'm going to put a form. Let's create a new form. Yeah. So let's look at our active form flows. Let's add one. I'll do something. Let's edit our active form flow. Okay, so within your active form flow, you'll see you have pieces of data from the form. So you have two kinds of things. You have one, which would be form data. So this would be form data is really your components that you're working with on your form. So one, we have like a control. We have a couple controls. You have just default on a standard form. You have your bottom bar, which is a grid. You have your contents bar, which is another grid. And then we added a button onto there. So within the form data section is where you'll have your different form controls. So if you add a text box under form data, you would see your text box. If you added different grids, you would see those as well. So within the form data, this is where you can control For example, you can control whether a component is enabled or disabled on a form, whether it's visible or not on a form. You can change values on a form. So let me just save this real quick. And if I go put another component for that example, save this, let me put a text box. One good thing to know, like form data will show you everything, but it goes off of the name of your property. So one best practice is to name it. We're just going to put name text box, is to really name your components so it's easier within your active form flow to start working with. So let me just say the data is name, save that. Let's get into our active form flow. Go to our data explorer and form data. You'll see the name text boxes here. And you have a couple more options within the form data because it is a value control. So you have your standard enabled, your visibility rule on it. But now you have another thing like a value where you could change what values passed into it or validation issues. So if you want to set an issue on that component. So can you create data outside of the form, push it into an active form flow without setting it on a control, like a text box? I haven't tried it, but let's see. So create data outside of it and push it into an active form flow. That's a great question. Let's see. You might need to set it as input data to your flow. Let me just see. So if we add an input here to our form, we don't need to put it as something, but let's just see if we have it available in here. Yep, it would be under form input data then. So you would just set it as a form input. And you don't have to have it as a control or something. Cool. So do you have any other questions around active form flows or anything else to overview on those specifically? Okay, so active form flows data. Which piece are you referring to specifically? I'm sorry. So like these the form control data? Gotcha. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay, I see what you mean. It's a good question. Let's see what that does. So if I show editor, I personally haven't used this, so let's see what it does. If I add like a first name field. So if I use active form flow data, first name, does that become available in my active form flow? Good question. I don't see it available to you to use. Let me save it. See. Let me also close. I want to see if it puts it as an input. Okay. So I set name, test field 1. Name is my component. So where does that active form flow data come from? Let's see. Just trying to think on this real quick since I haven't used it. And where does it become? Okay, so we set a first name field. go into our active form flow. Wouldn't be under flow data. Yeah, that's a good question then. So I'm not exactly sure the best way or functionality of actually adding that in. So the way I would mainly approach if you want to pass data into it, the way that I personally do it is putting an input onto the form itself. Reading through our documentation, it kind of showed it mentions that this active form data doesn't actually set an input to the flow as well, which we just saw. So I'm curious how you set that though. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a good example for how to use that piece.
Hey, I also have another question.
Yeah.
So we're using Okta and the for single sign-on, but so the problem is when you, for example, send somebody a link, let's say to the flow that runs a form, and that user is not logged into decisions.
Yeah.
When you use like a traditional login, it will redirect because it knows the original link, so it will redirect to that flow. But with Okta, is it possible to do the same? So let's say they are not authorized, they go through Okta, and then when they are logged into decisions, somehow to get that redirected to the original URL.
So is that, my understanding is that would be how it should work in practice. Is that currently not how it's working?
Correct, it's not working. It just sends. So basically, if you set the page for a user, it goes to that page.
Gotcha. Okay. I don't think I'll be able to get you an answer on this call for that one. Because I'm not as familiar with the SSO side. That might have to be, I'm not sure if you have a support ticket yet for that one. Or not. I would recommend submitting that through there.
Okay.
Yeah, because just from my understanding, the goal, I believe, would be to have it the same as just a native login without using SSO. It redirects you back to your original URL, but it sounds like with SSO turned on, there's some sort of other redirect going on at that phase.
Yeah, so basically it goes to Okta server, and at that point it loses the, well, not at that point, when Okta sends the request to assertion, I guess, URL to authorize decisions.
Gotcha.
They lose that URL at that point.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely submit a support ticket because if that's not how it's intended to work, it's definitely a valid feature request to get put in.
Okay.
So I would go through that route.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Are there any other questions to cover? Yeah, if not, I mean, feel free to put them in the chat.
Hey, Dylan, I have a question.
Hey.
So I have a form with a tab container. One of those tabs is called errors. On startup, it's hidden. And what I want to have happen is when the user submits the form and there are errors, I want to show that tab and then show a pop-up instructing them to go to the errors tab.
Gotcha. Okay.
Showing the tab and showing the pop-up, no problem, can do that easily. However, the logic or the steps to trigger those to show when there are any errors, I can't figure out how to do that.
Okay. Yeah, so let's walk through that. It's a good use case.
And that errors tab has a display all errors object on it.
Gotcha. Okay. So let me just leave these tab A, B, and C. So by default, when you start up, let's just say, I'll rename this to errors.
Sure.
So errors by default is hidden. When you go to submit something, so you have some sort of button that you hit, you would run your validations, and that's when your pop-up shows up and you display the errors tab. Is that correct?
Well, what I want to have it show, the vast majority of the validations would be empty required fields.
Gotcha.
Right? I very few kind of custom validations. But doesn't seem to be a method to capture, does this form have one or more validations? If so, do this.
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. So you want to capture somehow in the flow that list of validations.
I want to
the
capture
form-
that there is just one or more validations, right?
Okay.
Because the display all validations object shows me all the validations
Yeah.
as opposed to hovering on the button or whatever, which is a much better way for the user experience.
Yeah.
I just can't seem to figure out what step to use, if there is a step to use to
It's a good
say,
question. I don't know if there's a specific step. I mean, so all of that data would be available to you in the active form flow. I mean, let's go into here. Let's see. Because and I see how it would be a pain to go to each one of your components and get a list of validation errors from it. Like,
right.
that would be time consuming. So you just want to see, for this entire page, what is my list of validations? Let's see. So like, okay, because there's like a clear validation, set validations. There's not a get validations. That would be, okay.
And the all validations display object doesn't have a any sort of output. There's no property on it to get the string.
Okay.
It's just enabled or visible, I think, are the two properties on that object.
Okay. Let's see. Wouldn't be a control value. That's a, I don't know if there's a specific step that could do that for us. That might have to be a feature request as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't come across that before. I don't think if there's any workarounds for the time being, though.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking was I have a pop-up when the form is submitted successfully, right? To tell them that it's submitted, or sorry, not a pop-up, an end form. I guess I could just show pop-up regardless and just have, if the form is still visible, you have errors. If it's not, it's moved on.
Yeah. That's might be a temporary solution, but I do think that's a valid feature request to get your list of errors too. Because the only way I could think of just immediately is kind of like a brute force of it, of saying for each component, get your errors. So like for your let's see, is it under your form date? No, that wouldn't have it.
Yeah, I looked in form service and validation service.
Yeah.
Form rules where you are, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's a step, at least that's exposed in the toolbox to do that right now.
All right. Cool.
Okay.
All right, well, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for looking, Neil. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Okay. Are there any other questions around forms, or does anybody want to go into? I can go into like a demo of some features if you want me to try and show something, or is there any questions? If not, I can go into, instead of just ending right now, I can kind of go into a brief kind of demo of some best practices around assignments that we've been using on the professional services team, and just briefly go over how they work. So just to kind of start that off, assignments and decisions are a way to assign or task another user or individual with a piece of work. So let's start with this form that we have here. If we want to assign this form, let's say we have our first name and last name on there. We can assign that to another user to fill out the first and last name, and they'll get a notification. And from that notification, they'll have the ability to work it. So they'll pop up the form for them and they'll be able to fill it out. So that's basically how assignment works. But there's a few additional things you can do to make them more efficient. And kind of just go over how some advanced settings in general. So by default, to get a form to be an assignment form, you change it from assignment type to assigned. With this, you'll see some additional things pop up. So you're assigned to, you're able to type in an email address here. You can type in a specific username. You can type in a group, and that's who it'll assign it to. Assignment name is the name that you want to appear just for it. And then the action name is when the user right clicks on the assignment name or on the assignment itself, it's what that action says. So like we could just be like, I don't know, let's just say application or something would be our assignment name. And then our action name would be to fill out the application. So with assigned to, like mentioned earlier, you can go search like an admin account. Like for this instance, I could do my admin account. I could choose my administrators group. I could choose other groups. That's one way to set your assigned to. The other way would be in the assignment setup. And that's where you could say, specify your list of accounts and groups to assign it to. So if you were to, let's just say, build an array. So this is a list of strings. This is where you could specify individual accounts. You could specify your administrators group or different people to assign this form to. So the next thing that you can do with assignments is set different dates on it within this assignment setup. What these dates do is for you to specify start dates, warning dates, late dates, escalation dates. These can all be, they don't have a specific meaning to them. I mean, they're different data points, but you can use them how you kind of interpret them. So for example, you could specify a warning date. With this warning date, you'll get the ability to add a warning flow type. What this flow type does is it means when you hit a warning date or the date that you set, that workflow will run. So a good use case for that is, let's say you have an assignment for an application and you want users to fill them out within 5 business days. You could set your end date on that assignment to be within 5 business days, but you could set a warning date to say, in 2 days, I want to warn this user that the expiration's coming up. And then you could build the logic within your workflow there to send a reminder to that user. So it's the same as you follow that same pattern for your late dates and escalate dates. So like a late date would be after 5 business days, I want to run another workflow notifying the user that, hey, your assignment's late, you need to work it. To do that, you would follow that same pattern of specifying a late date and then specifying a late date flow. So those are 2 things that aren't as commonly used, but I think they're pretty valuable once you get how they work. You can use them a lot with assignments. So another thing, another best practice, which I kind of want to go over, which is pretty cool, it's a newer step, is a way to process assignments forward. So let's say that late date happens and somebody never finishes it. You send reminders, they don't ever complete their assignment. What you could do is build a workflow that can press that assignment forward. So it's not just sitting there and waiting to be completed. So I don't know why I closed that flow. Let me go back into here. One thing you can do with it in your assignment setup is add additional action definitions. What an action definition does is it really gives you another path on this form so you could do some additional logic. So let me just say an outcome path is not completed. So within here, by default, you can respond via email. I don't go this route. Just I haven't had a use case with it. Really, the key thing is defining your outcome name. So what this does is now you'll see if we click done, it'll give us a new path on our workflow. So this isn't a button on the form, so users wouldn't really necessarily know that this is here. They would know their complete button on their form, but they wouldn't know that there's a path for not completed. Let me just assign this real quick to, I'll assign it to my administrators group. Just fix this real quick. Save this. So if I were to go in and debug this flow, I could see that I don't want to work it, but it's assigned right now to someone. So let's say a couple of weeks go by, I haven't completed this assignment. You could build a cleanup flow that would push the assignment forward. So to do that, let me just say move assignment. There's a step here under system assignment. And then it would be called complete assignment in other flow. So this is where you specify your flow that you want to move forward. So if I pick an existing or recent, my test forms flow, you choose which step is your assignment. So if you had multiple assignments within a given workflow, you'd be able to choose which one you want to push forward. And then you could choose which path do you want to go down. Do you want to trigger that a user hit the button and completed the form, or do you want to go down the not completed path? So there's a couple other fields you would want to fill out here. One is the assignment ID. That's how you could tell the system which assignment to push forward. So you can always fetch that from the assignments table. Right now, I'm just going to get it from my inbox just to make it easier. So manage, get form assignment, copy text. And I'm just going to hard code that in here. You wouldn't want to necessarily hard code it in a production environment. That wouldn't be very useful. You build logic to fetch which assignment you want. And then you can add a comment. So since it went down the not completed, I'm just going to add, let's say, system completed. And then not complete responder email. I don't think I want to send out an email. Let me set that as ignore. I might need to fill that out since I might have had email handling or something I didn't check. So you'll see a warning now. What that warning is telling us is that we can't use a constant value. It's not saying you can't use it, it's recommending you don't. But if we debug this flow, we can go back to here. Let me try to zoom back in. So by running this workflow here and using that complete assignment step, we were able to push the assignment forward down that not completed path. So it's a good best practice to follow, setting these additional outcome paths, because there will be times where you have thousands of assignments and maybe they don't get completed. And you at that point, you just want to clear them from the system. You can leverage that process assignment step to move things forward. Okay, so are there any questions on that? I know it's just a brief overview of assignments, but I just wanted to give a couple best practices around it. Okay, if there are no questions, I think we can go ahead and call it a day. So thanks everyone for joining.